Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit Down. I'm not going to waste your time. The guy and show we're getting ready to talk about are already up on the TV screen, so why don't you pull up a chair, take a seat. We're getting ready to dive in spoiler-filled into Loki, Episode 1, Glorious Purpose. And before we get there, just some general housekeeping. We probably have some new eyeballs as we talk about Loki. And if you're wondering how I cover these Marvel shows or Star Wars shows, basically everything on Disney Plus that I've been covering episode by episode, you'll get a non-spoiler review first thing in the morning. I'll wake up at 3 because I'm on the East Coast, watch the episode, non-spoiler goes up. So if you haven't watched the episode, you don't want spoilers, don't watch this video, jump up there, man. Check out the non-spoiler video, and also check it out if you haven't seen it at all. Most of my overall thoughts on the episode will be in there, where we'll get very spoiler-heavy here. And then, of course, the spoiler review will come on later in the day. But now, we shift gears from talking about our Marvel Loki coverage in general and shift into talking about Loki itself. And I want to hit some overall spoiler thoughts before we dive in and break the entire episode down. Of course, you'll see my reactions before we do all of that. But before we get there, one of the things I loved about this episode, it was like 48 minutes long, almost 50. I think it's the longest first episode of all 3 series that Marvel has put up on Disney Plus. And I think it's off to the strongest start. Yes, there is a lot of talky, as Mobius might say in this one. And there's lots of things for us to learn and understand about the world that we're currently in, and there's plenty to set up. But I think of the 3 shows, what this could be leading to, I think sets up its initial start the best, and it's also the most cinematic, I think, of all 3 shows. Even though it's only 1 episode in. In my non-spoiler review, I talked about how much I love the look and feel of the show and what Kate Herron is doing. I really do love, the energy and how she is, giving us this unbelievable world. I mean, the production design is insane, and just how she's covering, her shots and where she's, putting the camera and moving things around. I'm just really interested, and I like I said, visually, this feels the most cinematic. The other thing I love is the writing in this show, and this is somebody that I should have talked about in my non-spoiler that I didn't. But creator and lead writer Michael Waldron, wow, dude, this script is absolutely fire, and I think what he's done, it's one of these things that all these shows do really well, but the rewatchability factor, you watch it and you're just like, wow, that was awesome. You go back in 2-3 times, and all of a sudden you're just picking up on all this stuff that Waldron is just leaving right in front of us to set up different things. And then right out the gate, I love that we have a mystery, and I love that we can start theorizing about stuff. I've got some theories about how Kang the Conqueror and Lady Loki might be playing into this season. We will talk about that as we dive into the episode itself, but I really do enjoy what Waldron's doing, at least here in this first episode, mainly because we just get to see Loki be Loki, and Tom Hiddleston being Loki is one of the most enjoyable things you can watch on screen. And I love, more than anything, that it's the 2012 version of Loki. Both the writing and obviously the performance from Hiddleston are so in sync and so in touch and in tune to that version of Loki. I mean, the arrogance that he has in the episode and the way he carries himself and the way that he talks feels a lot like that 2012 Loki, whereas the Loki we get by the time we get to Infinity War, before Thanos kills him, you have a very different feeling Loki, even though he is very much the same Loki. And throughout this entire episode, you just get to see Hiddleston do all the things that he's great at. And I'm telling you, I think one of the other things Waldron has going on here is Loki is up to things that we aren't even aware of. I think he's, as normal, 3-4 steps ahead of everybody, and might be already doing things that we aren't seeing. We'll talk about that as we go through. But I just love that, you get to see that stuff and just see him, understanding and being the genius that Loki is. The way he picks up on the things that operate and function inside the TVA, either he knows about the TVA beforehand and is trying to get there, or he's learning on the fly. And either way, the writing is just, and the performance are really, really good. I mean, we see him play with gadgets and technology that he shouldn't know anything about, and he does it expertly. And I just love all of that stuff. I also absolutely love the score here. Whether it is, pulling pieces from other Marvel material, we hear notes all the time in these shows and movies that hint or nod at different elements or times in the MCU. But whether it's that or just how it plays with the shifts in tone, this first episode is flat out hysterical. It's got this mystery and intrigue to it. There's all sorts of emotions for Loki, whether it's mad, anger or sadness. Even the awe and wonder, just the way that you like seeing the TVA, how we, the audience, are like, wow, this is crazy. You get moments like that for Loki, and the score just syncs up and matches perfectly, and I really like how it helps drive the episode forward. And as I said, the rewatchability is just fantastic. I've watched it 3 times, and I pick up something different every single time I watch it, and that's why I can't wait to dive all the way into this episode with you. So those are my overall thoughts, man. I really love this first episode. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 Seamans on the non-spoiler review because I think it's really, really strong. I mean, it's damn near perfect for me, but you gotta leave a little wiggle room, because I think this thing's only going to get better. But now let's jump into this bad boy right on. And before we get there, you guys see the old Seaman's reactions to Loki episode 1. Check him out! Awesome. Oh! That was awesome.
Absolutely not. Fine and guardian letter.
Oh no. Oh no. Oh no.
Hang on just a minute.
Oh no. So he's dropping him.
Please confirm to your knowledge that.
So let's not waste another minute. Set a
Look at
beat,
this
sharpen your
interaction.
pencils, and check this out. Long ago, there was a vast multiversal war. Countless unique timelines battled each other for supremacy. Nearly off your path created a Nexus event, which left unchecked could branch off into madness, leading to another multiversal war.
Madness, multiverse, let's go!
Try to ask that guy for a ticket, sir. We engaged in great reason you recently, Buckethead.
Oh no!
Thanks for visiting the TV. Don't hesitate to let us know how we're doing.
What a freaking cold open, let's go!
And believe me, you can smell the cologne in 2 Tony Starks. You speak of criminals, it's they who should be after. Perhaps. Okay. Maybe like I'm always looking up to you. I like it. It's appropriate.
Jeez. Dude, the money they spend on these shows, holy fuck. Like, how much money did that cost?
That's not real. The idea that your little club decides the fate of trillions of people across all of existence at the behest of 3 space lizards. Yes, it's absurd. like to talk. Give me the Tesseract or I'll gut you like a fish, Casey.
It's a fish.
What? That he starts? How do you have these?
Oh, we actually got a lot of those. Yeah, some other guys use them as paperweights. Some of them.
What?
Oh, what's happening? It's so messed up.
Money. The area we're hunting is you. I beg your pardon?
What? The devil they're chasing is Loki? Dude, this show's so good! I'm telling you, dude, this show, at least early on, certainly has the potential to make me laugh quite a bit. But like I said, now I want to jump into this bad boy right from the top and run all the way through. And I love the fact, as I said, the way that this feels cinematic. We dive right into a place and a situation that we're very familiar with, man. We see the end of the Chitauri, invasion. And we see the Avengers escorting Loki out. This is, of course, the moment in Endgame where, Tony thinks that he gets everything that he needs, and he's got the Tesseract, and he goes to leave, and Hulk smashes through the door. Tesseract lands at Loki's feet, and boom, he disappears. And I love that we open and we start there. Like I said, it helps in making it feel more cinematic. It feels like it's even more tied in directly to the MCU DNA because we're seeing those characters and those things that we're familiar with. And one of the other things that I love about this, and this is one of these long shot theories you can kind of throw out there, but you get, again, to see Loki turn himself into Cap and kind of try to imitate him. And it's one of those where it's like, could this show us Loki maybe being Captain America? We keep wondering where old Cap is. What if maybe old Cap is Loki? I've heard people throw that out there, and initially I was like, that's just absolutely insane. But when you start right there with Loki impersonating Cap, it's like, are we going to see at some point that Cap is actually Loki in disguise or something like that? Just one of those references that I think is kind of funny. But from there, we get the Marvel, cinematic kind of open, and then we jump to seeing Loki land in the desert. And this is where I'm talking about how I think Loki might be up to things that we don't already know. We've seen Loki use the Tesseract before, and I've never seen him launch himself out of the middle of the sky into wherever he's going. It usually seems like he's got some kind of control over the Tesseract and as how he is moving. And granted, yes, he's trying to just disappear in that moment, but he looks in control. And the episode opens with also something else that I think plays into the humor wonderfully, Loki falling. This is a trait specifically with Doctor Strange, and knowing that Waldron has kind of written a pass on that movie. How he's tying this directly in, and the fact that you have these references that start with Doctor Strange. Loki falling is something that happens a lot in this episode. And you see him crash land, very much like Iron Man in the first Iron Man movie. And even the shot that Heron gives you is very similar to that shot of Tony in the sand. But we come in on Loki, and he is in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. That's one of the other things. Why is he there? If he can pick a place to go, why is he going into the middle of nowhere in this small settlement where there's 6 people that he jumps up onto a rock to try to inspire or talk to or convince him that he is, a god, much like he would have been doing right at the end of Avengers. But it's one of those why is he doing it? And then immediately the TVA shows up. And right before that, right before they show up, he actually utters the line, "I am Loki of Asgard, and I am burdened with glorious purpose." There's our title, and we'll hear Loki utter those words again later in the episode, after he comes to some revelations for himself. But the TVA shows up almost right away, and we see Wunmi Masaku, who I absolutely adore. She, of course, is from Lovecraft Country. Comes in as the hunter leader to the Minutemen squad that shows up. I believe she is listed as Hunter B-15. And right away, that seems to capture Loki's attention. It's one of those was he trying to get the TVA to grab him here? Was he expecting it? Or is this just a random occurrence where he's like, well, this is way more interesting to talking to you people. They have technology and stuff. Maybe they'll be able to give me some sort of an advantage. I don't know, man. I'm telling you, Loki is always scheming. I think from this point all the way forward, he's already either working on a plan in real time or already has a plan. But nevertheless, we see Wunmi Masaku's Hunter B-15 come in to arrest him. And, he goes to put up a little bit of a, no, you're not going to do that. And she hits him with this baton, which I believe is glowing purple. There's two batons in the show. You have a purple one, which does what happens to Loki, and then this orange one that seems to just incinerate people. It's resetting of their timeline, so it makes the person disappear. But Masaku hits him with this purple one, and you see a punch in slow motion, how everything kind of jiggles. Well, time is moving regularly, but Loki is not. He's moving at 1/16 the time, which means he is not only moving that slow, but Masaku also points out that he is feeling that pain in real time. So he is feeling the pain of the shot that he takes. 16 times longer than he should. And again, just plays into the wonderful comedy that absolutely, is spread all the way throughout the episode. And then we see one of the Minutemen hit a reset charge that basically resets the whole area. So, these people that were talking to Loki, boom, everything gets reset back to what we will learn is called the Sacred Timeline. They come on in, and we are at the TVA. And like I said, the production value on this show and everything that Marvel does is so big and so, wow. You see the TVA, and I was just it's insane how much they put into it. And the look and the feel and the vibe of the whole place, I think, just suits what it is going to be perfectly. But Masaku brings him into a front desk, and we see what looks to be a guy at who would be your reception person. And this is Eugene Cordero, who's playing Casey, and I call out his name because I really enjoy his performance. He pops up a couple times in the episode, and every time he's on screen, I'm just good for you, Eugene Cordero. I like what you're doing here. But they stop in. She drops off the Tesseract to him, which is why we will see him later. And then brings Loki to this, it looks like a closet, and just kind of throws him in. And, Loki's throwing out threats. She's like, sure, we'll see. And you get another kind of Iron Man vibey reference where you have this machine that you see kind of starting to poke and prod, and it's got a TV for a head, and as it's starting to poke poke Loki, you kind of feel is this thing okay? And as it flips, there's a face that pops up. It's two eyes and a smiley face, or sort of a smiley face. It kind of struggles to get there and tweaks its face several times. Again, all playing into it, but it's going after Loki's clothes, and Loki's stop, no, this is Asgardian leather, you can't mess with this. And then the robot actually says hold very still, and you see this thing come up, and they laser off his Asgardian leather. And as Loki is getting his bearings, once again the floor literally falls out from beneath Loki, and once again Loki is falling as he lands in the next spot, which is a small little office, and we see a cat that kind of freaks out Loki, which immediately makes you go, is that a flurgan? And then, he sees this guy behind desk with this massive stack of papers, and he's like, please sign this as everything that you have ever said. And immediately Loki's like, what are you talking about? Another sheet prints out, plus this, and he's like, this is absolutely ridiculous, or something like that. Another sheet prints out. So just to move things along, as Loki can see what it's doing, he signs it, and then again, the floor drops out from underneath him. And also, when he lands, he's already enclosed. It was almost kind of like the Batman pole in the the 1960s version of Batman, where he would be Bruce Wayne, get on the pole, come down, and he'd just be dressed up as Batman. When Loki lands, he's dressed up in what looks like prison gear that says TVA on it. But from there, he gets dropped in front of now what looks like, kind of like a metal detector you go through at an airport. And there's a guy there, and he's like, please confirm that you are, an actual, living organism with, your own thoughts and a soul. And Loki's like, do people not know that they're robots? And like the fact that the TVA is even like, we're trying to keep robots out because that could be bad, I'm sure, it is interesting. But again, it allows Hiddleston to really lean into the comedy elements that you can get with Loki, where he like hesitates and he's like, I'm not so sure, and as he goes in, like lights flash and you get this almost like a like instant photo camera, a Polaroid, there it is, a Polaroid camera of his temporal aura. And as soon as they said that, I was like, oh man, that feels like something that you would hear in Doctor Strange. Is this another thing that kind of is hinting at things we'll see when we get to Multiverse of Madness? But, you know, basically just confirms that he does have a soul, he is a living organism, and they let him pass through. And he comes to, you know, what looks like a big waiting room, kind of like something you'd see at the DMV. You know, you got a roped-off way so that, you know, if there's a line, you can maximize the amount of people that are inside the room. There is nobody in the room, and we see actually one person come through. You know, he's complaining like, I don't know, my dad's super important. This isn't gonna stand. The guy's like, take a ticket. He's like, I'm not taking a ticket. He moves on through like, I know, I'm slick. And as Loki comes up, the guy is like badgering him like, take a ticket. And Loki's like, there's two of us in here. I don't think I need to take a ticket. So Loki just grabs it, shoves it right in his pocket. Thank goodness Loki takes that ticket, because as we get further along, you see what happens when you don't have a ticket, and you don't want that to happen to you. But as we come in, this TV screen pops on, and we get this little cartoon voiced by Tara Strong with this wonderful southern accent of a clock. Miss Minutes, I believe, is her character's name. And it proceeds to play a video that literally gives you the history of the TVA, who they are, where they come from, who the timekeepers are, and it very much feels like Jurassic Park. You know, when you get that intro to like DNA, even down to that southern accent. But basically just lays out everything with the TVA and the fact that, you know, there was a multiverse of different timelines, and that led to a multiversal war, and also led to the timekeepers going, we're going to take that multiversal war, we're just going to make one sacred timeline, and it is then their job after that is to create the TVA. They create all the TVA agents, the Minutemen, to keep track of the sacred timeline and make sure that nobody breaks out of it. Now, when I saw this originally, it just made me think, oh, so there's just one universe, and like, yes, you can splinter off, but the TVA slaps all those splinters. As we go through the episode, I don't think that's the case, and we'll point out why when we get there, but I think it's actually, there is a multiverse, but all of those multiverses are following the same timeline. So you could have, you know, a different version of Loki causing trouble if it's not this one. And like I said, we'll get into that more as we get closer to why that seems so apparent. But as you're watching, you know, and they're talking about like the madness and the chaos, you know, you hear Miss Minutes literally go like, their job is to keep that timeline sacred and intact, because if it's not, it could break off into all of these, you know, different splintering, you know, timelines that could lead to another multiversal war, and just absolute madness. And it's not, that's the line is way cleaner in the show, but it is multiverse and madness in the same line. And again, you go back to Waldron, who, like I said, has you know, contributed to the writing of the Doctor Strange movie, and you can see how they're tying, like, this is going, I think, to lead into some way that WandaVision and, you know, the Doctor Strange timeline or storyline. So I'm very interested to see how we get there. But, you know, they kind of go through and then they talk about that people that break off and create these splintering timelines are called variants. And, you know, variants can be all different versions of yourself. And you see the cartoon change from, like, a guy to a guy with a cup for a head and a guy with a top hat. And just, you know, they kind of splinter off, and then you see the TVA comes and they grab the person, bring them back to the TVA, and then, boom, hit the little cartoon like line that breaks off the timeline to dissolve it, much like they do with those reset charges. Then you get brought back to the TVA, put in front of a judge who determines whether or not your crimes against the timeline warrant death or resetting, and then, you know, they kind of go from there. So Loki proceeds, you know, through the line as this you know, video wraps up, and I like the animation too. When they're talking about the timekeepers, the animation felt very, very old school, like the comic books where the paper kind of felt like newspaper to a degree. Like those old school comics, it felt very much like that type of animation until they got to like the actual multiversal stuff and the little characters that they created. Those cartoons felt more like things from, I feel like the 60s. There's a style and vibe to them that definitely pop, but I can't quite put my finger on it. But anyway, you know, you get to the front of the line, and Loki sees the guy who didn't have a ticket, he gets reset right away, and you don't actually know what happens. Like, does that version of that person just disappear for forever, like they never existed? Because when they come in, they certainly do have souls, and clearly when they reset a timeline, that person like goes back to that spot. So when they, I don't know quite how all of that works, but when Loki sees that happen to him, immediately he's like, "Where's my ticket? Here's my ticket, man! Here's my ticket!" And we get the Loki open. But then we jump to 1549 in Aix-en-Provence, France. And we are joining Owen Wilson and his character Mobius, who is based off the character Mobius M. Mobius from the comics, and his group of Minutemen at what looks to be a crime scene in a church. We see a bunch of Minutemen who are down and killed, and you hear like, you know, the stabbing patterns line up right. Like, you know, I think one of the Minutemen is like, it's him. You know, he's like, yeah, the stabbing does line up right, and like some of the things that they're seeing, that like it came out of nowhere. Like, this could be him. And then in the background, you see something move, and all the Minutemen like get their batons ready, and, you know, almost like chill. It's a kid. He goes up and talks to this kid to try to find out what happens. And to earn his trust, he has like this little, what looks like a cell phone. He draws a stick figure, and he hands it to the kid. And he's like, tap it. And the kid taps it, and the stick figure pops up in like this little, you know, animation, you know, kind of like holographic animation. And it's kind of like a way to earn the kid's trust. And he asks him, like, who did this? And he speaks to him in French. And the kid points to a pane glass window that is the devil. This is, of course, the shot of the devil that we saw in the trailers that immediately made a lot of us go, is Mephisto in play again? And the creators and the show both confirm very quickly that that's not the case. We're not referencing Mephisto, and I love that they did that because we know the rabbit holes we can go down with that guy. But it is a reference to Loki and his horned helmet. You know, the horns on the devil are quite elongated in the pane glass window. So it definitely kind of gives you the vibe of Loki, and that kind of confirms to Owen Wilson that who they're looking for is who this person is. And then he notices that the kid's got like blue teeth, and he's like, what's going on with your teeth? And he takes out this pack of gum. I don't know what significance this gum has or not, because they sit on it long enough for us to read that it's called kablooey, and it is blueberry, spelled Bleuberrie. This makes me think that this is something from a different universe and different timeline down in the future somewhere. Like maybe this is some kind of futuristic gum or gum from some other place in time. But it certainly is gum. You know, it says it's artificially flavored, all that jazz. But clearly, Loki has got stuff on his person that either he enjoys or that he knows he can use to try to help, you know, as he moves throughout, if this is indeed Loki. But that's clearly how he kind of bribes this kid off. Probably to get information to get into the church and stop the Minutemen or whatnot. But you hear from there, you know, Mobius go, you know, check this for sequence period. So I think they can literally figure out exactly where in time it is from. And then temporal aura, which would obviously, you know, confirm to them that it is indeed Loki. And the guy's like, you're not going to get any of that. He's like, I don't care. Go. And then another TVA agent opens up the portal doors. They're getting ready to leave, comes in and is like, hey, Mobius, you're going to want to see this. Hands him a file, and it's Loki's. And they open it up, and they sit on that file long enough and still enough for us to read good chunks of it. And there is a piece of material that's in there, and it's in the credits. It happens a little bit faster in the credits, but you can see that, you know, Loki's gender is fluid. And in the comics, Loki is a gender fluid character. He has been a woman before Lady Loki. And that could play into possibly who we see toward the end of the episode. But there have been vibes and the thought that Lady Loki could appear in this series in the lead-up. I mean, we've seen images of Sophia DiMartino in an outfit that looks very Loki-like, and I think it's important that they sit on his file and that we can see something like that. Because, like I said, I think it's going to play into what I think is going on when we get to the end of the episode. But immediately, Owen Wilson slams that closed and is like, off he goes. And then we get to the courtroom. And this is, you know, basically Loki's hearing, you know, whether or not he's going to plead guilty to his crimes against the sacred timeline. And you come up in front of a big old bench, much like a judge's bench, and we see Gugu Mbatha-Raw, who is playing Ravonna Renslayer. Now, I point out that name because Ravonna Renslayer has a very important tie to a character that is supposed to be coming in Quantumanium named Kang the Conqueror. And I also think that Kang the Conqueror might show up here, or at least be set up in this show. And we'll get into that later on, but I keep your eye on Ravonna, because she could be a very important character. But nevertheless, you know, she kind of lays out, like, this is what you did. Do you plead guilty? The first thing Loki says in very Loki fashion is, ma'am, a god never pleads guilty. And she's like, well, if you're not pleading guilty, like, who do you think did it? And he's like, I think it was probably the Avengers. Like, clearly they're messing with time, probably to stop my ascent to being a king, and an absolute ruler, because that's that version of Loki. It's the 2012 version. He's like, you can smell. He even goes like, you can smell the cologne of two Tony Starks. Like, they were all over this. Like, he could sense. I mean, there are two Tony Starks in that moment. But basically, like he's saying, like, I don't pick up the Tesseract and do what I did unless the Avengers mess with the timeline. And immediately, Ravana is like, the Avengers, leave them out of this. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. They're allowed to mess with time because Cap goes back and fixes the timelines and maintains that sacred timeline for this universe that we're in. I'm telling you, I think there's still multiple universes just all following one specific timeline. Like, I think you could have different versions of events that all lead to the same outcome. That's why I think the TVA maybe lets people play with certain elements. Or you'll see too, like when they're tracking down variants, one of the things, like tech pieces that they pull out has like, here's your sacred timeline, and if you reach the red lines, that's when something could be a Nexus level event, which is also something we heard in the cartoon. Again, another reference. The only place we've heard Nexus in the MCU, of course, is to WandaVision. All again leading, I think, to that Multiverse of Madness movie. But I mean, that piece of tech, like, I think gives the ability for, like, there is stuff that could play, but what you're doing, if it leads to a major event that could break things, we got to shrink it back down. But he's basically just trying to spin that it's clearly not him. He can't possibly be guilty. And then he kind of questions the timekeepers. He's like, so wait, what is the timekeeper's job? And Ravana is like, he's like, I want to talk to the timekeepers, rather. And she's like, they're busy, dictating the proper flow of time. He's like, and then what is it that you do? And she's like, I dictate the proper flow of time based on their dictations. Stop it. What do you plead? And he goes, guilty because of this. And he goes to use his magical powers. And that whole build-up, which of course his magical powers will not work in the TVA, as we'll see throughout the episode. But it has like a real Wizard of Oz vibe. Like, we keep hearing the timekeepers. They have these big statuesque busts behind Ravana in the courtroom of their faces. And they're very comic accurate. They look just like the timekeepers from the comics. But like, it has this vibe that, like, they might not be trustworthy. And like I said, I don't know a lot about the TVA from the comics, but this certainly feels like maybe they could be what we're being presented with, or maybe they could be something else, and maybe it could be an outside influence, who knows. But it does feel like if you peek behind the curtain, you might see something you don't think you're going to see. Nevertheless, like I said, Loki tries to use his magical powers, and they're like, sir, your magic doesn't work here in the TVA. We're gonna, you're guilty. Take him out. And he, like, freaks out, And I love that as we hear him talk throughout the episode, even to Owen Wilson, like, this idea of, like, destiny and being in charge of your own decisions, and, like, you don't understand my power. And that gives Owen Wilson's Mobius an opportunity to go, I think I understand his power. And he, approaches the bench, and, Ravana's like, if you are doing what I think you're doing, I don't think it's a good idea. He's like, trust me, I have a feeling about him. And he clearly snags Loki. And we know that he's doing this, as we find out by the end of the episode, because that's who they're chasing. The reason talking about now, like they were chasing Loki at that church, and as they go through, that's their target, because that's the reveal, spoilers, at the end of the episode. But that's clearly why Mobius is grabbing him. Who better to track down Loki than Loki himself? So Mobius kind of takes him through the TVA, shows him around. We get this gorgeous inside shot. Like, you want to talk about production value and spending the money. Like, the physical sets, sure. When you see the TVA, and like, it looks like a spaceport station you'd see in, like, Star Wars, man. It's gorgeous. And the orange glow that just is everywhere throughout the TVA, it looks so cool, to the point where Loki's like, this has got to be magic. There's no way that this is real. And again, like, it's one of those, like, I don't always, like, he's presenting like he really doesn't know what's going on, but I don't know if I totally trust Loki, you know what I mean? But yeah, he's like kind of blown away, and at the same time, he's also like, he's angry, so he's like, I'm gonna burn this place down. And no one was like, well, why don't you start with my office? And then, I think Loki says this place is a nightmare right after. He's like, well, I will help you burn. He's like, that's a different department, but I'll help you burn that one down. And immediately, as soon as you hear nightmare, man, it's like hangover from WandaVision. I was like, on my toes. I'm like, he said nightmare. Does that mean nightmare's involved? Could he be referencing the nightmare realm? Again, one of those many Easter eggs I'm sure we'll see throughout Loki that could make us think something is going on that's not. I don't think we have anything to do with Nightmare, but an interesting nod, because of course we have heard that Nightmare could be involved in the Doctor Strange movie, and same, right? You know the deal. Mobius takes him into an interrogation room, and I love right before they go in, they're talking about the timekeepers, and Loki's like, it's ridiculous that there's a group of space lizards that are in charge of trillions of people's lives. Like, that's ridiculous. I only get where I get because of the decisions that I make. Things like I just love, again, how in tune Loki is to 2012, and I love that he called them lizard people, because if you look at their faces, they kind of do look like lizard, or like space lizards, rather, not lizard people. But there is definitely a lizard vibe to some of their, character traits. Anyway, we get into this interrogation room, and you see Mobius dealing with this like kind of cool advanced like projector that shows Loki's timeline. And he sits, Loki down, and right before he can do that, Loki, I think, tries to like jump him or whatever, and he uses what they call time twister, that allows him to reset Loki back to any point in the timeline that he wants. Like inside of the TVA, anywhere that Loki goes, he can just be reset right to one of those places. Not like to that moment in time, but to that place. So everything's moving forward for Mobius, and he can bring Loki right back to wherever he wants him to go. So he loops Loki the first time he comes at him. He's like, come on, just sit down. Let's talk about this. And this entire sequence is just flat out amazing, dude. Like, the back and forth between Loki and between Hiddleston and Owen Wilson is absolutely, like, phenomenal. Like, it's very much like when we're watching Falcon and Winter Soldier. Like, yes, these are two guys I want to watch go do things together. I'm so here to watch these two do anything in this show together, because their chemistry and just on-screen back and forth is wonderful to watch. But Wilson, is poking and prodding. He's trying to find out, what makes Loki tick. And I love that, like, he points out all of, like, the things that make Loki Loki. Like, Loki tries to act like he doesn't want to talk, and he's like, come on, you're a huge talker. That talky we've seen in the trailer. He points out that he's a huge metaphor guy. I know you love to use metaphors to make yourself sound smart, and, Loki's like, I am smart. And we're like, yeah, we know you're smart, but, like, you also make it sound like you're smarter than you actually are. And that he's, someone who loses quite often, and all of these other things, the fact that he's a great escape artist, he's always running away from something. All of these things that make Loki Loki, Mobius wants to know why, hoping that, I'm sure, it'll lead to the person that they're tracking down. This is where, you get to start to see that projector being used, and we start with a shot of Avengers, and, Owen Wilson kind of moves through time, specifically through that Avengers movie, to different moments that, could be things that could help him figure out why Loki does what Loki does. You see the Avengers, and, he points out, like, you lose quite a bit, and you just make mischief and trouble that just help people, be better versions of themselves. And he kind of semi-threatens him, and he's like, last person that said that, he's like, oh yeah, Phil Coulson. Shows him what happens to Phil Coulson. He's like, do you like killing people? Like, is that something you enjoy? Look at when you take the eyeball out of this dude. Like, look at that smile. Do you like doing this stuff? Even to the, like, he's like, and Loki tries to come back with, like, something that could direct, the attention away from whatever it is that Owen Wilson's trying to get at. And he's like, you know what? Let's look at this too. Like, you're a master at escaping, man. You're really good at doing, bad things and then getting away. He's like, check out this one. And we jump to that airplane footage of Loki, clean cut, short hair, in a suit. And this is something I thought was going to be him hopping around the timeline helping the TVA out. No. This is actual history of Loki. And he is, we find in the clip, D.B. Cooper. And D.B. Cooper, for those that are unaware, is a guy who took a plane hostage with a bomb, asked for a ransom, and then a plane to fly, I believe, from Seattle to Oregon, where he just jumped out of the plane. And no matter where the FBI looked, they've never, ever located or recovered, the body. And we see Loki do all of these things with D.B. Cooper, with the charm and just everything that Hiddleston is so good at. And, he jumps out of the plane, and right as he's about to, he's like, brother Heimdall, you better be ready for me. And he jumps out with all the money, and shoom, in comes the Bifrost and just snags Loki. You see a bunch of money disappear, and you're like, oh man, how many moments are there where somebody did something, or just, like, how many times did Loki mess with, like, the world previously? And why was he allowed to get away with all of those? But also, it's one of those things where, like, he tries again to direct away, and, Mobius is like, dude, come on, you were freaking D.B. Cooper. He's like, I lost a bet to Thor. Like, the fact that the D.B. Cooper storyline in the MCU is because he lost a bet to Thor, genius level stuff, man. Like, this is the type of writing that I love. But from there, Mobius continues to just poke and prod and pry. And, you get again one of these kind of like little monologues from Loki where he's talking about destiny and how he's in charge of it and that this is ridiculous. And Mobius is like, you want to see ridiculous? If you would not have jumped and disappeared, you would have been taken back to Asgard as a prisoner, and you would have spoken to your mom, and then you would have been taken downstairs, and that's when the Dark Elves would come in, and then you would direct them to the area you think Thor is in, but is actually where your mom is, and then she gets killed, and like shows that to Loki. And this is the first time in the entire sequence where Loki is like very interested and like confused, and like I think it's the most genuine Loki moment you have in the entire show, where I think he could be casting an illusion himself most of this time without powers, but like just by playing a role that he needs to play. This is the most honest moment that you get, and he's like, stop it, this is a terrible joke, like where is she, where have you put her? And Owen Wilson's like, This happened, man. This is your history. And it's like, the TVA, we don't just know your past. We know your future. We know your entire timeline. Everything that's supposed to happen. And he's like, and this is real. And Loki wants to deny it. And he's like, you don't understand, man. He's like, you create the mischief and the mayhem, and you do it over and over. And this is real. And this happens again and again and again and again. And this is the moment in the show where on my third watch, I was like, oh, damn. The multiverse definitely exists. I think they're just all in one timeline. Because why would that moment happen over and over and over and over again unless Mobius is, subconsciously referencing the fact that there are multiple universes in existence. They're all just operating, like I said, I think, on this timeline. Really, really interesting thing. Like I said, the rewatchability of the show is mind-boggling because of the things that you can pick up the third or fourth time in. But from there, it kind of gets Loki like real pissed off, and he chucks a chair and then goes at Mobius, and Mobius resets him, and he falls back to the spot. He's like, sorry, it only sends you back, not the furniture. So he falls on his ass, and is just kind of Mobius is like, look, come on. Help us out, man. He's like, let me help you, help us, and like kind of like goes to help him up, and as he's helping him up, Wunmi Masaku comes running in, and he's like, what do you need? She's like, there's something urgent. She's like, there's always something urgent. He's like, Loki, you stay right here. I'll be right back. He walks out of the room, and Wunmi Masaku first is just like, you shouldn't trust this guy, and he's like, don't worry about what we should or shouldn't do. Like, I was getting somewhere with them until with him until you interrupted. And she's like, well, he took the guy they're chasing is taking down another unit, so we've. Back in France, they said 6 units, so now we're up to 7 units that have been taken out by whoever this person that they think is Loki that they're chasing after. So, Mobius is like, all right, whatever. Goes to go back in to wrap things up with Loki and hopefully, finish where he left off, which is getting him to help them chase down this person. And when he goes in there, ain't no Loki. Loki getting up to Loki things, man. And this is where it's like either Loki knows what he was doing because he understands how this tech works, or he's just picking up on it watching when it's been done to him. But he clearly knew that he needed something. So I think when he throws that chair and he goes at Mobius, like, Loki's smart. He doesn't need to do that a second time. He knows what Mobius will do. He wants Mobius to do it this time so that he ends up on the ground to give him a reason to help Loki up so Loki can pickpocket the device right off Mobius. And when Mobius goes in and sees that he's gone, he's like, You clever little mischievous, like, jinx or something like that, man. And sure enough, Loki is using the reset thing, and he reset himself to a time where he's out in like the hallway, and when he lands, he sees Eugene Cordero pushing this like push cart, and he immediately knows to follow him because Eugene Cordero has the Tesseract, and for Loki, if his magic doesn't work, at least the Tesseract should. So he goes after Eugene and gets to him in his office, and he like threatens to gut him like a fish, and Eugene thinks he's threatening to turn him into a fish. He says it later on in the episode. I'm telling you, every time Cordero's on screen, I absolutely love what he's doing. But like Loki basically threatens, and he's like, I will like murder you terribly if you don't tell me where the Tesseract is. He's like, alright, it's in the desk. Loki pulls it out, and you see him get the Tesseract, and he's like, yes. And then his eyes catch something, and he's like, where did you get these? And it is literally the entire drawer is just filled with Infinity Stones, and like multiple versions of Infinity Stones. And Cordero's character is just like, oh yeah, man, we get those all over the place. I mean, some people here use them as paperweights, and it's like, that moment, immediately everything just fades away, and Loki is like, this is clearly the most powerful place in the universe. I think he literally says, is this the most powerful thing in the universe? Like, is this the greatest power in the universe? Like, Infinity Stones are useless here. Infinity Stones, we seen what they can do in the real world. So, like, the fact that they're useless in the TVA, wow, the power. And again, if Loki is thinking on his toes, he's immediately readjusting everything right now to try, most likely, to be like, all right, I'm going to work with you guys because you have some sort of power that, like, you couldn't believe. And while Loki is going to figure out a way to kind of catch up to the version of Loki that we know, this is still the 2012 version of Loki. And seeing that kind of power would trigger that guy to go, if I could harness something that's greater than the Infinity Stones, I could take over everything. And it's right at that moment that Masaku shows up, the Hunter B-15, to take Loki down. And Loki immediately uses the machine to reset himself back into the interrogation room. Masaku takes a swing with that orange baton stick and ends up, I think they call it pruning, which is that, like, how it resets that timeline. Prunes Cordero's little pushcart, to which he does not seem very happy about. But then we jump over back to Loki, who is back in the interrogation room. Like I said, he figures out a way to kind of catch himself up on all the events of Loki, understanding that what he was watching is his whole timeline. He continues to fast forward, and we see him go from the death of his mom to the death of Odin to the kind of betrayal, heartbreak with Thor, to the kind of makeup with Thor, to Loki's ultimate end. And this is, I think, the strongest section of acting that Hiddleston has through the entire show, because of just what he does with his face. Like, you watch that 2012 Loki get caught up to where he ends up, and not only where he ends up, but the fact that, like, in 2012 he's working for Thanos so that he hopes he can attain power to just be the ruler of Earth. And then he sees the guy he's working for snap his neck. And also, right as that reel ends, we actually get a camera shift to the real ending, and we see it kind of spool off. And there's an interesting little thing right in there. Now, I could be wrong, but I think it's Mysterio that confirms that the Earth that the MCU is in is 199,999, like Earth, that number. And obviously, we know that in the comics, the proper the proper Marvel timeline is Earth 616. Well, at the end of this little reel, there's something that looks like it says tail, then a -E-ETH, so Earth dash. Now it could be a 616, but it looks like 615. Then /E-ETH-616 Loki Laufey-son. That makes me think that this is, like, communicating in some way that this is the Loki from Earth 616, which could be confirming that the MCU is actually Earth 616, much like the comics. Maybe. I don't know. It's the first time, I think, in the MCU proper that we've ever had an actual direct reference to Earth 616, which, of course, is the Marvel comic book timeline. So I'm fascinated. I don't know what that means. And if it is a 615... why are both on there? Is this, like, I don't know what that means. Does that mean, like, for 615 and 616, this is what is supposed to happen to those guys? Is it all just, maybe it's all 616, and then the speeding of it's kind of blurry because of the motion, but I don't know. But it was the first 616 I think I've ever seen inside the actual MCU itself, which got me kind of a little, like, giddy. But anyway, I mean, you're talking about a Loki, though, at this point, who doesn't see that. He's focused on the fact that Thanos has just cracked his neck. And you just see, it's like watching the innocence drain out of a kid's face. And, like, he is disturbed. But also, again, a guy who's always thinking, no way he's going to let this timeline play out like that. Like, he is... if they're going to reset him, he's not going to let it happen because he doesn't want that fate. And it's one of those things, like, you can just see that in Hiddleston's face. Like, that's the stuff going through Loki's head. And then as he kind of, like, realizes all that, he starts to laugh. And as he's laughing, Masaku comes running into the interrogation room. She's like, what's so funny? And he goes, glorious purpose. And it's kind of that idea, like, he had that glorious purpose right at the beginning of the episode where he says that same line. Now he sees that glorious purpose, what it leads to. And that if there is a place with a power like the TVA, it's all pointless. Because if he can get his hands on it, he can probably figure out a way to reset his timeline or change, the sacred timeline to something that's advantageous to him. At least that's my general thought, man, because Loki is clearly always thinking about himself, and he's always 3 or 4 steps ahead of everybody. And right after he says that, Masaku comes for him, and Loki goes in to fight, man, and he gets his ass handed to him real quick. Masaku hits him in the face, gets the arm behind his back, slams him onto the table, and again, it's one of those things where it's like, damn, she was really good, or was Loki doing that on purpose because he realized he didn't have the little remote control, so when he gets slammed in, you see him reach, he grabs it, he then reverses the move on Masaku, hits the button that releases his collar, and then throws it on her. Which brings me to another point. He knew he could take the collar off. The only reason he kept the collar on is because it was advantageous to him to be able to move around his own timeline inside the TVA, so he could get in and out of trouble to create some mischief. The minute that he no longer needs that, and instead would rather mess with the person that's been after him since the jump, boom, he flips it right on her, and then does this wonderful thing where he, starts to rewind and realizes you can mess with that, like that little piece of tech more than you realize. And he kind of rewinds, she's like, stop, and he rewinds again, she comes falling in the same motion like when she was running into the room, and she says it, and then he does it again, she's like, stop it, and then he just keeps doing it and doing it and doing it, and then eventually just, boom, sends her off, and is genuinely intrigued, which is why I think he's learning all of this on the fly and just figuring it out because he is very smart. But Masaku ends up landing back in one of the hallway areas, and we see Cordero's character talking to 2 guys with sashes on. They must be it almost made me think of the safety patrol, but they must be people who help run the TVA or whatever. And he's like, yeah, man, and he came in and threatened to turn me into a fish, and then they showed up and pruned my cart, and then Masaku shows up, and he's like, oh, that guy you had, he escaped, and Masaku looks real pissed, and we jump back to the interrogation room, and Loki's sitting, looking real kind of sullen, playing with the Tesseract, and Mobius comes in, and he's like, try to use that, and Loki's playing with these multiple times, but much like my magic, this doesn't work here either. And then you get what seems to be another really genuine moment for Loki. I think it is an act. I think it is an illusion. I think that he is playing Mobius because that's what Loki does. But he comes clean to Mobius in the sense that he's like, I really can't go back to my timeline. And what he's telling him sounds like, okay, you're going to cooperate. Loki is saying, I can't go back to my timeline because if I go back to my timeline, I end up dead at the hands of Thanos, and I'm not having that happen. So what do I got to do? And then kind of goes into another one of those monologues where he talks about, the fact that, this is just all one big illusion. And he re-says that entire line, I'm part of the illusion. I do the things that I do. Mobius tries to get back into that conversation. He's like, I do what I do because it's part of the illusion. It's something created by the weak to instill fear so that, and then Wilson finishes the line, to obtain power or whatever. And, Loki's basically like, that's why I do what I do, man. I got to maintain that illusion at all times so I can get myself ahead. And it's at that point where he's like, so you want me to help you catch some guy? What good is that? And he's like, because the variant that we're chasing is you. And that's that big reveal, oh, damn, the guy they're after is Loki. Oh, that's what the stained glass window references to Loki. All these things start to fall into place when you realize that. That's why the rewatchability of the episode is unbelievable. But from that moment, where you're like, oh crap, that's what Mobius's whole, that's been his angle the whole time, we jump to 1858, Salina, Oklahoma. For those who are history buffs, you'll know what that means. Someone like me, not a history buff, I immediately looked that up on Google because I was like, I bet that has something to do with something. And sure enough, in 1859, Salina, Oklahoma was the first place, I think either in Oklahoma or at the time, that started flowing with oil, where in Salina, the place they found was producing 10 barrels of oil a day for an entire year straight. So if someone was going back to 1858, it would be to get to the oil before other people get to the oil. Or at least that's what you would think, I'm sure, if you're a TVA agent. And naturally, we catch up with a couple TVA agents and we see them come in, and there's this red glowing stick. It kind of looks like it's got a shovel handle. It's stuck into the ground. It's glowing orange, and it's got this big circle in it that's also glowing orange. And they're immediately it is what's going on here. That they run a trace on it, and it's like, oh, this is from the third millennium, so that would be anywhere in the 2000s, from 2000 all the way up to the year 3000. Would be that millennium. And again, I had mentioned that like Kang could maybe be out here or involved somewhere, and we're starting to get into that. And he is someone who is from the 30th century, which does exist in the third millennium. But this is a something from the future, clearly not from 1859 or 8, and also from the TV, like from what our normal point in time would be. This is somewhere further on in the future, some kind of tech, and they're running traces. She's trying to run scans very similar to the ones that Mobius was asking for, probably to figure out the time period it was from. Like I said, that's how I think she finds out it's the third millennium. But then she's probably trying to find the temporal aura on it, and before she can even get that far, the other agent is like, oil. I bet you somebody from the third millennium found a time machine, thought they'd be smart, come to 1858 to steal the oil and become rich. And he's like, this is a waste of time. Like, she's like, should we go looking for them? And he's like, it's a waste of time. Like, it's just for the paperwork. Like, this isn't gonna disrupt the time. Like, it makes it seem like, someone who could be disrupting the timeline with a time machine, what they're getting up to, it's not important enough to impact, the sacred timeline. Like I said, that you got that range where those two red lines are. You can play inside there, and that, I think, could create the different versions of the different universes and the multiverse in general. They just all have to adhere to the main story points of the timeline. Very much like the MCU, right? Like, Kevin Feige has this main timeline, and every writer can write their version of the story they want. It just has to adhere to those main points. It's almost like they're pointing out what the MCU does directly to us in the show. So they go to get ready to leave, and as soon as they turn, the guard is like, wait, there's someone out there, and you see this mysterious hooded figure. And they hold up a lantern. And you can actually see them holding up the lantern right there. They're on the poster. But as they hold it up, they then drop that lantern. And the reason that oil was on the ground is not because they were trying to steal it. That person created a kill box. And you see the fire create a box around them and then rip through the middle and sets all of these Minutemen into a blaze, man. They go down in not a good way. And one guy is like trying to crawl back to the reset charge that's on the ground, and something, it didn't seem like a person, but something pulled him. Makes me think someone maybe with magical abilities, or maybe someone with some kind of technology that could just rip a really large guy from the ground back into the flames. You hear him scream to his death, and then you see a hand come down and pick up that reset charge. And as Mobius had pointed out, or I don't think I said this, but when they were at the church, that charge was missing. It was gone. It was taken. Whoever this person in the hood is taking these reset charges. For what purpose, who knows? But they're gathering up a bunch of reset charges. And yes, the TVA believes this person to be Loki, which brings us to like that first kind of like real mystery in the show. Who is this person? Is it actually Loki? And if you were following in the lead up to Loki, it kind of seemed like there might be a Lady Loki in play. We have seen, as I mentioned earlier, Sophia DiMartino in an outfit on set from leaked photos that looked very Loki-esque. You got the green, you got the little collar thing going on, and I think who we could be seeing here is actually Lady Loki. What she's up to and why she's doing what she's doing, who knows? That could probably be where we end up by episode 2. We're gonna see, DiMartino, I'm sure, pop up somewhere. Because again, even like I went back and I was looking at the pictures, even in that setting, kind of looks similar to that place in Selena that they were. So I think we could find out really quickly that it is Lady Loki. What does that mean? I'm not really sure. Unless, of course, you're trying to tie this to Kang. And as I said, the show has already given us the hints that, like, Ravonna Renslayer is in play. She has, a love interest connection to Kang's story in the comics. And if you have a show about time and the timeline and people messing with that, well, wouldn't you want a villain that is someone who does that to the point where, like, there are so many different versions of Kang? Like, there's a council of Kangs in the comics. He's someone who goes up against the TVA. He also goes up against himself in the comics. He's worked with the TVA. Like, Kang is the perfect villain for this show because of the type of show it is. Now, you see that person in the hood, it could be Jonathan Majors, but I feel like Jonathan Majors might be a little bit bigger. This seems like someone who's built more like Tom Hiddleston. So maybe Kang wants reset charges for something that he's doing, some kind of scheme he's up to, and maybe he's acquired the talents of Lady Loki. helping a bigger power to gain her own power, very similar to how Loki helped Thanos. And maybe the big bad for this next stretch of this phase 4, maybe the big bad is Kang. Yes, we're going to get him in 2023 in Quantumania, but maybe we start to see him established before then. He becomes kind of like that Thanos. And Loki, who worked with Thanos, could be Lady Loki working with Kang. And maybe he's got some kind of time plot. But I would not be shocked if we see Kang enter in some way. And granted, we know Feige has said you don't have to watch the shows to watch the movies, so it might not be the actual introduction. We might not see Kang, very much like we didn't see Chthon or Mephisto in WandaVision, but it doesn't mean that we're not laying bricks for him. So that's my early theory, man. I think Lady Loki is working with Kang on some sort of power plot, and that's who the TVA is chasing, and that's who the TVA will use Loki for to go catch. And I'm sure we'll continue to see Loki picking up on things that will eventually play to some sort of advantage. I'm telling you, he's either got a scheme that he came up with in between the shot that we've seen from Endgame and him landing in the Gobi Desert. I don't think the Gobi Desert is completely random, and it almost feels like he may have been up to stuff before that, and in a last-ditch effort to just jump, got out and crash-landed in the Mobi Desert. I'm telling you, I think Loki's up to something, because he's always up to something. But for the first episode, man, this thing is doing everything you want it to do as a Loki fan. Hiddleston is on fire. I love the chemistry with Owen Wilson, and just all the things that are in play. This is going to be like WandaVision, man. We got a mystery. We got reasons to dive into the comics. I'm going to give you some theory videos coming up. But I'm pumped, man. Like I said, I think we're off to the best start of all of the shows so far. This is the most cinematic. It feels like a movie, and I can't wait to see what we get with Hiddleston and Wilson and just this whole cast. I mean, Wunmi Masaku and Mbatha Raw. Like, I'm just pumped for everybody. So that's all the Seaman spoiler thoughts on Loki Episode 1, Glorious Purpose. Now I want to know what you're thinking, man. Give me all your spoiler thoughts. You can go crazy. What are your theories? What do you think's going on? Is Loki ahead of the game? Is he just kind of playing ball because he has to, because he doesn't want to die? Do you think that's Lady Loki at the end? Do you think it's Kang? Do you think it's someone impersonating Loki? Could it be Lady Loki working with Kang? Anything you're thinking, good, bad, indifferent about the episode, or any of your own theories, down below in the comments section. Look forward to talking to you down there. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with the old Seaman as we go every week. Wednesday mornings, man. It's the new Friday. You want to be here for every Wednesday where we're talking Loki, any of the theories or things, or just like what I'm doing with, reviews and reactions. You want to show a little love support to the old Seaman? Come, join Seamaniac Nation by jumping over there, hitting that subscribe button, hit that little bell if you want those alerts, and until next time, with Seaman's Cinema, sit down. I've been the Seaman, and I am signing off. Peace. Oh, hey, what's going on? You must be sticking around because you're looking for more content featuring this guy. Well, guess what? You're in the right place. You can check out more videos right here and right here. And if you have and you want to come join that Seamaniac Nation, you can hit that subscribe right over there.